Good morning. So I had a question in the comments from viewer Micah, who was asking me to elaborate on how how I set up my thread on the Model 27. And so I will explain that, but I think we better first kind of address what the issue is. So there are two ways that threads are spooled, and we have examples here. So the pink one is, I'll show you, hopefully get a little bit closer there, is threaded crosswise. So when you pull thread off of a spool like this, it travels up and down the thread spool really quickly. And then there's, these ones which almost look like satin on the spool, right? They feed off very slowly and the thread slowly travels up and down. I didn't know this until, somewhat recently, and I've been sewing for years, but depending on what kind of machine you have, there is a correct and incorrect choice of the type of spool your machine will use. To put it simply, if your machine spool has a side-mounted spool pin, like a lot of modern machines have this, the antiques don't, but they're going to use this kind, because this kind with the very cross winding on here is meant to spool off this way. Or if you have the straight up and down spool pin, it's meant for these, which slowly travel up and down. The antique machines always have the vertical spool pins, so they're meant for these ones. And if you put something like this on there, that can actually mess with the thread tension on the machine and cause a myriad of weird and mysterious issues. Yeah, ask me how I know. But so that being the issue, we can fix that with adjusting how we thread, well, kind of how we thread, and what kind of setup we have for our spools. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you a couple things just on my modern machines, and then we'll talk about the 27 and antique machines in general. So Micah, I hope this helps to answer your question. And yeah, so let's go get set up. All right, welcome to my admittedly very, very messy sewing room. And let's take a look at the two different ways that spools are done today. So we're going to start out here. So we have this spool where you can see the crisscross very clearly on how it's wound. And then you have this type of spool where everything looks reasonably horizontal. Hopefully that's focusing reasonably. So these are meant to mount on two different types of spool pins. The pink one with all of this crisscross business, that actually goes and mounts sideways like on my embroidery machine here, right? So the other is meant for a machine like my little brother here. I have the wrong kind on there now technically, but these that pull off fairly straight without traveling up and down the spool too much. So like that. These are meant to be mounted straight up and down like this, which is the orientation that we see on antique machines all the time. So in case you're wondering, we'll come back over here for just a moment. So you have stuff like server cones, or even these like larger lots that can be used on sergers or regular machines. So like this kind of cone would fit here on my embroidery machine, or even stuff like this, which is an embroidery machine cone, would fit on there. So if you wanted to use a serger cone or something like that on a machine like the little brother that has this type of spool pin on it, then you end up using this kind of contraption here. Yeah, like one of these guys. So, you know, you stick the cone at the bottom, pull the thread up to the loop up here at the top, and then from there you hook it onto, you know, start threading from here and go the regular way. So now that we've talked about how these different types of spools work with modern machines, let's go back out to the other room and we'll show you and talk to you about how it works with the antiques. All right, so we're set up over here with the 27. So first I'm just gonna explain how I have it threaded. First, I've got it's threaded with red, by the way, just for you guys to be able to see better. So I've got a cone of thread here, and it could be anything. It could be this type, you know, it could be, you know, this one here with the crosswise. It could even be this one. It's not gonna hurt to use one of these. This is the type, you know, the straight up and down, that should be used on this machine. But if you do this sort of setup, you'll be able to use whatever you need. Right now I've got a cone of red on here. So it threads from the cone. It comes up here to the little elbow thing, comes through. And then I've got a binder clip on here. And the reason why I did that is because I can put the thread through the kind of little handle loop thing and it won't escape. It won't move or shift around too much. And then I've got it going around the back of the spool pin. And this basically creates the correct path for the thread to follow. So it goes from the spool pin, it comes up here to the thread guide at the right angle. It comes down through the tension discs, spring, take-up lever, guide, and needle. And that's the path of the thread. So the deal with these sorts of spools is because of the way the thread comes off, these are meant to be mounted this way so that they spool off like that really easily. But if you're putting them straight up, it travels up and down the spool really fast. It'll create wobble, it'll be unstable, and it screws with the tension of the thread while it's coming off the spool. This type, where it unspools, I can't even get a hold of it, gosh darn, where it unspools and slowly travels up and down the spool of the thread, this is the type of threads of spools that they were making back in the day when these machines were being made and used. So this is really the only type that this machine is intended to be used with. But, you know, for example, I really like this particular brand. What is this one? Gutermann thread. I buy these things all the time for my projects. And if I want to use this machine, and a lot of times I do, that means I need a different setup. Or I'll buy, you know, the larger spools like this cone back here, you know, because I'll have an entire Italian Renaissance dress to make and I don't want to run out. So I'll buy multiple of these, or I'll buy the big ones when I can. And so here it's this deal is meant to get the thread to come off the spool the way it's supposed to. Whether this would have been mounted sideways like on my embroidery machine, it's still spooling off this way. And since it's now on, you know, the thread stand, it's mounted straight up and down. It's got a big old hole in it though, so it can knock around and move and whatever it's going to do down here instead of up here. And that's going to be okay, because it's going to do what it's going to do. It's still going to spool off correctly because it's going straight off. And then the loop of the binder clip here just keeps it from moving or going or straying too much. It's around the back of the spool pin because that basically emulates the idea that there should be a spool right here. And then you thread it normally. And this works pretty good, and I can use it with any type of spool that I want to use it with. The 66, which is over there, the 66 would work the same way with this kind of setup. And it would, because again, this type of spool is what it would normally need to use. So that is why this crazy, screwy kind of looking setup is happening here. And that is why you want to pay attention to what kind of spools you're buying. Well, either that or you do a setup like this, or you make sure that when you're buying spools of thread from Mint that are meant to be used with these old machines, that you're getting this kind, that spool off slowly and don't rock and roll a whole lot when they're up here, like these ones do. So that is the video for today, and I hope this was helpful.